God bless everybody. Today is June 25th of 2020, and today we're going to go over the expanded timeline of Daniel 8:12 and Psalm 90:10, and how the rise of the Ottoman Empire is going to be regurgitated after 100 years and affect us in the immediate future. You can find all my articles and videos and teachings and everything that I do on eschatology at endofdayssurvival.com. We originally put a smaller timeline together which went over the 4 set number of days that Daniel gives us in Daniel 8 and 12, which are the 1200. He doesn't give us the 1260 because we know that that's from the signing of the treaty to abominations, and that's indicated in the times and times and a half and the 42 months and the 1260 days. We see that one constantly reoccurring. So we went over this in another video, but he talks about the 1260 days, the 1290 days, the 1335 days, and the 2300 days, and how this is going to affect us basically from 2021 forward. I indicate it's on June 30th as we go through these 2300 days from the Feast of Tabernacles on October 17th back 2300 days will drop you to June 30th of 2021. That's what we sort of went over in the last video, but in this video, this is going to change because what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how the Ottoman Empire is going to affect us after its destruction in 1923 in World War I. And how after 100 years, Erdogan of Turkey is going to bring this back to us. As you can see, if we go into here, I go back to the original destruction or liquidation of the original Ottoman Empire back in World War I during this treaty in August 10th of 1920. This treaty was converted to the Treaty of Lausanne. This was the final treaty concluding World War I. This treaty recognized the boundaries of modern-day state of Turkey in July 24th of 1923. Well, if you know anything about Erdogan, you've been following him at all, he has a mission. And what is his mission? I'm going to try to go over this with you now. Oh, wrong way, excuse me. His vision is that he is going to basically reconstitute the Ottoman Empire by 2023. He stated this in basically since 2010 or earlier, but this was actually documented that in a speech he wants to bring back the centurion 100-year empire to the world. And he's going to do that in the next year or two as we start to move into this Daniel 8 effect that I've talked about so many times. So let's go back to this beginning of this thing. We know Erdogan's mission. Let's see how Erdogan's mission lines up with what's happening today. So as we can tell, as we move into the future, we know that the creation of Israel was on May 14, 1948, and this is the 70th year generation. We're going to move this generation forward 70 years. Okay. The reason I put that there is so you can see that that would end in 2018. Okay. So if you compel this forward on this timeline, this is going to move you down into this timeline as we go forward, and you're going to see the pertinency to what I'm talking about here as we move forward. But right as of now, let's get back to this further thing in the back. So we have the creation of Israel in May 14th of 1948, and that's why this parable is so important in Psalm 90:10, as we've talked about here, because he's talking about the 70 year of the creation of Israel, and the strong generation, or the 80th year, which would then take us to May 14th of 2028. And so all these things are going to happen prior to 2028, as he tells us in Psalm 90:10, that all things will happen before the strong generation of Israel, and then we will fly away, which is the rapture that people call it. After this formation of Israel, we had a number of blood moon tetrads. We had one in 1949 and 1950. These all fell on Jewish dates. And you can see those Jewish dates. I'm sorry it's a little fuzzy. I just pulled these pictures off. And I verified all these dates, so you can go and look at these dates. But we had this tetrad in 1949, 1950, but then we had the Six-Day War tetrad in 1967, 1968, and this was the recapturing of Jerusalem. But all these 4 blood moons also fell on Jewish holidays. And this is going to be a running theme as we start to look at all this stuff. All these things are happening on Jewish holidays or around Jewish. It's all Israeli centristic and Middle Eastern centristic. So, you know, if people are starting to throw New York City down in China and other teachings, then they really don't know what they're talking about. And we need to get rid of these terrible teachings, and so that way we can actually get the true message out to people and they can start to see what's really happening. So I'm going to go into these modern day events that started in 1991 when George H.W. Bush, George Bush Sr., came out on October 30th of 1991 in the Madrid Peace Process. This started this happened right after Desert Storm. It was the start of the division of Israel. It happened on October 30th of 1991. What happened that very day? A freak storm came out of Nova Scotia on the very same day. Even the weather service did not catch this. It came out of nowhere. It was not in a normal hurricane track. There was nothing normal about the storm. It just popped on the screen. It built to a huge hurricane. It was called the perfect storm. It was the largest storm in a century, 100 years. Came into New England and destroyed everything from New England to Florida. The very day Bush started to break the land of Israel up and divide it. And this has been a theme ever since this original speech of October 30th, 1991. We have seen our presidents, almost all of them, if not all of them, come out against Israel or for Israel and either try to divide the land or do something to Israel that has caused a major effect on this country. And so right after he started to break and divide this land of Israel in the Madrid Peace Process, they moved this to Washington on August 24th of 1992. They moved this process. And what happened between that window of August 16th through the 28th, right in the middle of it, now whether he knew the hurricane was coming or not, you never know, but on the 24th, it made landfall. This was Hurricane Andrew, and it hit directly in Florida. You can go look at these dates. They're not contradicting. These are not coincidences. There is a reason for these things. So on September 1st of 1993, the New York Times reports that Israel and the PLO are ready to make a joint recognition of the dividing of the land of Israel in the Oslo Peace Accords. This was September 1st of 1993. And what happens? In that window of time, between August 22nd and September 6th of 1993, on September 1st, same date that this article came out, We had Hurricane Emily come over and smack North Carolina and then recede back into the ocean. Coincidence? We'll see as we move forward. So we do move forward, and so Bill Clinton becomes our president. And in January 16th of 1994, Bill Clinton and President Assad of Syria have a meeting in Israel, and they start to give up part of the land of Israel to Syria called the Golan Heights. Now this happened on January 16th of 1994. What happens? The day after Bill Clinton starts to give up part of the Golan Heights, we have a massive earthquake in Los Angeles. A 6.8 magnitude earthquake rocks Los Angeles. It's called the Northridge Earthquake. It devastated for hundreds of miles out throughout that region, and it happened on the very next day after Bill Clinton stated that he was going to give the Golan Heights to Syria. Then in March 1st of 1997, Bill Clinton with Yasser Arafat leave Israel, arrive in Washington, D.C., and they talk about the segregation of the housing and how they're going to split up the housing in East Jerusalem. This is a worldwide problem. This is a very holy place, and the whole world condemned this meeting. And so on March 1st, when they flew into Washington, on that very same day between March 1st and 2nd in 1997, we had massive tornado destruction throughout Texas, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and Iowa. Coincidence? Maybe. On September 11th in 2001, as we move forward, we had what? 9/11. We have 4 coordinated terrorist attacks by Assad or Al-Qaeda against the United States. The World Trade Center is attacked. Both buildings fall. On November 10th of 2001, just after this event, just 2 months after this event, George W. Bush, George Jr., the first time comes out and calls this 2-state agreement, calls for a Palestinian state and a 2-state solution. Okay, so this is a buildup of something coming here, because he's now starting to talk about the breaking of Israel again. On June 24th of 2002, George Jr. Bush comes out again, calls for a 2-state solution, and presents the roadmap to peace in his speech. And March 20th of 2003 through December 18th of 2011, we start the Iraq War with Saddam Hussein. Okay, this is right after, within a year to 2 years of him talking about this Palestinian state and how they're going to break this up and have a 2-state solution. And before Bush is done, through his term, in August of 22nd of 2005, George W. Bush Jr. has a speech applauding Israel's disengagement from Gaza. And now this is August 22nd of 2005. On August 23rd to the 31st, the day after, this starts the day after Bush comes out and recognizes the disengagement of Israel from Gaza, we have Hurricane Katrina. This lasts for almost a week. It's a long durational hurricane, and it just does massive destruction to this country. So we can see that these things line up with these statements of our president. God tells us he picks kings. He picks our kings, whether they're good or bad, depending on what our countries are doing. And guess what? Shortly afterwards, we got Obama. And we know how he transformed this country towards the radicalized side of Islam. And we can have a disagreement about that. But he was not a good thing for this country, and he radicalized and brought all these Muslim immigrants into this country, and they started building mosques and different things like that. And what happens when a Muslim country destroys another and takes it over? They start to build a mosque, and they show their superiority in that part of the world. Well, shortly after this 2005 speech, applauding this disengagement from Gaza, and we have Hurricane Katrina, there may be some things happening between these events of 2005 and 2010 that we can add in here for this. And I'm adding to this constantly, so I just want you to realize that this is where I'm at this point. And as I find things, I will add them to these timelines and these graphs so that you can see these correlations. So at the beginning of, or at the end of December of 2010, we had what we call a triad. We had a 3 blood moon triad. One was on December 21st of 2010. This was a December solstice date. You'll notice that most of these blood moons fall on a date of some kind in the Jewish calendar. Not always. As you can see, this December 10th, 2011 one, I cannot find anything of substantial consequence in the Jewish calendar. Yes, it does fall on minor holidays, but nothing of any consequence that I could find. If you find something, let me know. I would love to add that to the chart. But June 15th was the second one on 2011, and that was during Pentecost. The things that were interesting to me on these 3 blood moon dates are this. So on December 21st of 2010, we had a blood moon directly over United States. On June 15th of 2011, we had a blood moon directly over Israel and Jerusalem. And on December 10th of 2011, we had a blood moon directly over the United States and Israel. It was visible on both. Just shortly after this, we have another tetrad with a major comet event leading into this tetrad and a full eclipse in the middle of it, with a partial eclipse falling on the Feast of Trumpets. Gotta look at these calendar Jewish dates, man. They're so important. Look at how all of these dates are radiating out on these Jewish calendars. You cannot make this stuff up. It's just what it is, and God sets it up because it's His world. So the Jewish New Year, which fell on May 20th of 2015, was a full eclipse. It was on the spring equinox, and on the 15th, just prior to this 20th date of spring equinox, President Erdogan, visits Mecca and is anointed around the black Mecca rock. Really? This is important information. This is the starting of an anointing of a king, an Ottoman emperor that's going to be coming into effect. And guess what? Look at the date on that. You got 2015, you go to 2006 years later, 2021, you're talking about that Shemitah year that we were talking about over here. Okay? 2021, you start that Shemitah year. Then you have the destruction of the temple the year afterwards, which is the 7th year. Okay, same thing, 6,000 years, and now we're moving into the 7,000th millennial year. All these things matter, but look at that. That Shemitah year starts here and moves to that Shemitah year that we're just now starting to walk back into in 2021 again. There's not these correlations. And if you go back 7 years here, guess what happened? You can go back 7 years and you start into 2008, or you got to start looking at these things. These Shemitah years matter. These 6 years and then the year of forgiveness. All these things matter. It's like this. We're at the 11th hour of the 6,000th year, getting ready to what? Move into tribulation down here with the rising of the Antichrist, that signing of that covenant of death, 1260 days to abomination. So these are important things. We really have to look at how all this lines up. And I'm going to keep going through this map, and we're going to add more and more things as we start to see these correlations. But look at this. So on September 28th, we had a supermoon directly over Jerusalem at the end of this tetrad, which is starting to show that there's going to be a judgment against Israel, I believe. So 3 years later, we have another additional triad. These all fall again on Jewish holidays. You can see the dates here. You can go look them up. These are just a progression of events that are going to lead us into what I call is the start of the Daniel 8 effect, or Daniel 8, the 2300 days. So on these Jewish holidays, I wrote down a couple things. Now, I added one thing, and I don't take credit for things that I didn't come up with, so I'm going to revert you back to the image that I saw on January 20th of 2018. This was the original image that I got, that Gog of Ezekiel 38:39 is actually the white horseman of Revelation, and that this is Erdogan. And this is when I started these videos and bringing this information out to you just shortly after that. I actually documented this on my Facebook, so you can go out and look at it. And then I made a video in February just after that about Erdogan of Turkey being Gog, or the white horseman, and how I believe that he was going to bring us into the sorrows, start the Daniel 8 effect of the destruction of Iran and the Kurds, and that he would then gain his crown, his white horseman crown, and that would then compel him as the new white horseman or Ottoman emperor, and that would then take 10 full nations into Israel, and that he would die on the 6th seal because he is the first seal. So he's going to take a quarter of the world into war, bring all these plagues and famine and destruction and global meltdown and all these things through the 4th seal. The martyrs of the seals war are looking at our Lord going, when are you going to revenge us? And on the 6th seal, when Erdogan gets to the Temple Mount with his 10 nations, God destroys them, as Ezekiel 38:39 indicates. He destroys all 10 nations within their countries and in Israel. And then we start into that process of bringing forth the anti-resurrected Gog that I've talked about so many times. So this is important. I'll sort of go through these things as we get into this. I want to point these things out, and so you can see these correlations, and if you've watched my other videos, they'll make sense. If you haven't, they probably won't. So you need to go watch the other videos on especially Gog of Ezekiel 38:39, how he is the white horseman and how those correlations matter. So I had this image on January 20th of 2018. Now this is the beginning of the second term of Trump. This also leads us back to a number of Bible passages and different things that talk about in Daniel about the second year of Darius and different things like that, because you have to look at the past and take that to the future, because a lot of these things are similar events that radiate from the past. that show us what's going to happen in the future. May not be exactly how they happen, but it gives us a template so we know what to look for. So that's just a note in here that that's when that first original image I saw of Gog and how he was going to change the environment over in the Middle East, and how he is the catalyst to bringing on the sorrows that we're going to see starting in 2019 on Yom Kippur here as we move forward here. You're going to hopefully see how this all works. So you see that we had that image, and then we had these 3 blood moons just shortly after that. And like I say, is there a correlation here? I don't know. It happened within 10 days, 10, 11 days after the original image, and we had these blood moon occurrences. I thought the one on July 27th of 2018 was extremely important because this is the longest blood moon event in the last century, and it was directly over Israel. Okay, so this middle blood moon, this coincides with Mars as its closest approach in 15 years. And what is Mars? Mars is considered the planet of war. It's the red planet, the red horse, the second year of Darius. They send out the red horse. He goes out and gets the report and brings that back. We're talking about the same things going on here. So you need to look at these correlations as he's getting this report back. We start into what? Daniel 8. He's going to start the judgments as he gets his report back from the horsemen that he sends out. And these are not necessarily the same seals horsemen as the red horsemen and some of these other Zechariah and other different things. But he's sending these horses out for reports, and they're bringing back a report, and then things are going to happen shortly after that. So on the 3rd blood moon of this triad, we have a Jewish holiday called the New Year of the Trees. Okay, and this is on the 3rd blood moon of this triad in January 21st of 2019. So, like I said, almost a year prior, almost a year and a half, almost 2 years prior to this, I had that image of Gog, but then we saw there was an invasion of Syria on Yom Kippur, October 9th of 2019. Erdogan, for the very first time, documented, goes into Syria, invades Syria with a massive group of armor, and tries to capture a 30-mile buffer zone between him and Syria so that he can start to regulate his border. I have been saying for a while now that this is the very beginning of the sorrows. So Jesus right now is standing with the scroll in his hand and is breaking this first seal. He's got the title deed back to the earth. He's going to reclaim his planet. He's going to take it away from Satan, and Satan's going to lose his seat in heaven before long. But this is the start of that start of the sorrows before we get into that Daniel 8 effect of that 2,300 days that we talked about. So what happened from the time Erdogan went into Syria on October 9th? Look at what's happened in the last 8 months or so. You know, you've had the pandemics, you've had a global meltdown, you've had a recovery, but now you're having reinflammations and hot pockets of corona, and it's going to then start to lock the countries down, and it's going to happen. This is happening still in the first wave. We'll get to the second wave of the corona in the fall when we start to hit the real flu season. This is still first wave, and the second wave is always 10 times more devastating than the original wave. So if they unlock this, and I'm going to state something right now, when they unlock this 4th of July There's a reason there's a blood moon over the United States at that time, and I've shown you this a little bit ahead of time, but now that's come to my head, I want to throw it down on you. On July 4th and the 5th, we're going to have a blood moon event directly over the United States, and this is what they call, it also passes over Saturn, which is God's sickle. It's considered God's sickle in the astrological calendars, this planet of Saturn. We will see a major transformation or judgment starting to be brought against the United States because Trump started to divide the land through his treaty that he set up on January 28th of 2020. Trump unveils this peace of prosperity proposal dividing the land of Israel, which God tells us is a no-no. This is you just don't do this. This is God's land. It's only God's land. No one can take this land from God. No one can give it away. This is God's title land. It's his chosen place. It's his bride. You can't separate this from him. 2 days after this, like I say, on January 20th of 2020, he unveils this peace prosperity proposal, the peace treaty that will be used in the signing here later in 2024 in April on the chart over here on the end. This treaty will be used here. It's already in place. It's just not signed. Okay? The treaty's in place for when Antichrist gets here. It's already been built. And because of this dividing of this land, 2 days afterwards, we're already in Corona, okay? Corona's already been in since like October in China. But what happens 2 days afterwards, the WHO, World Health Organization, declares the coronavirus a global health emergency. It is now becoming a pandemic at that point. On April 11th through the 20th, we have 2 events, a Comet Swan and a Comet Atlas. Comet Swan correlates with the global meltdown in April called a Black Swan event, where the markets tumbled 30% or 2,000 points, whatever they tumbled, and oil dropped to negative $40 a barrel. Okay, this is unprecedented. Oil has never dropped negative, number one, and never have dropped down negative $40 a barrel. Think about this. Normally, you have to have $40 a barrel to sustain viability in the market. So to drop down $80 below the sustainability level of a barrel of oil is catastrophic to oil countries, and God always has told us in the Bible that he will not hurt the oil or the wine, and there's a reason for this, because there's no demand. There will be no demand as he locks this country down and breaks the idols of the world, and he locks us all into this Exodus mode that we're in. So this 2 comets happen, and we see this global meltdown occur the same month. But then what happens on June 17th of 2020, Turkey begins invasion against the Kurdish rebels in the northern part of Iraq. This just happened. Within the last 4 days, this just happened. Okay, so we're getting into today and how this is going to affect us now, not what happened before and what's going to be future. This is really what's affecting us right this minute. And then we're going to show you what's going to happen in the future, hopefully, and make some correlations later as we move into this. So on July 4th and 5th, we just talked about this event over the United States, this main blood moon event. It's supposed to go right over the country. I believe it is on our Independence Day. And just as we were talking about this beginning of the sabbatical year here and the destruction of that second temple coming up, we're going to see a judgment against the United States as a blood moon is over the top of us. And on June 30th of 2021, I state that this is when I believe that 2300 day cycle is going to start of the Daniel 8 effect. This Daniel 8 effect takes us into 2300 days that starts, if you read Daniel 8 starts with this ram-goat war and takes us to the restoration of the temple. Okay, the restoration of the temple is not abomination. Restoration of the temple is when God puts his bride back on Jerusalem and reunites heaven with the earth, which is at the very end of the story here, during the Feast of Tabernacles, after he drops his bowls of wrath down. So look at how this lines up. So you're having these judgments against the United States, and you're having a judgment that's going to be against Israel as Gog starts to move towards them. We have that new sabbatical start of that new Shemitah year. You have the next year, that destruction of that temple. And guess what? That is that 6-year transfer into that 7th year Shemitah again. Can't look at the last Shemitah was back in 2015. The end of the new Shemitahs in 2022, and then guess what? You're going to end up with the next Shemitah, end of the millennial, in 2028, and that's the end of the parable, is in 2028. So you got to look at these Shemitahs and how they affect us and how they're going to affect us in the future, and that is this fall of this Jewish state was the rising of the Babylonian Empire back in the day when the second temple fell back in 70 AD. This now will be the rising of not the Babylonians, but the Ottomans. Okay? This will happen at the end of 2020, right before he gets into Israel. And look at that. Right after that, you have the 100-year commencement of the return of the 100 years on July 24th of 2023. Remember, you go back to that original treaty back here when they recognized Turkey, had the destruction of the Ottoman Empire 100 years later. We're going to compel this Ottoman Empire back. And this is where he gets that crown. This is that white horseman crown. I've told you for a while, I believe it's going to happen. This coronation is going to happen at the tomb of Suleiman Shah. This will happen after the Daniel 8 destruction of the two kings of the Kurds and the Medes, or the Kurds and Medes in Iran and Persia. And then you see the crowning of this Ottoman king, because he's going to be compelled to a higher level at this point. He's destroyed Iran. He's destroyed the Kurds. He's a major factor in the Middle East right now. And the Muslims will follow him because they know that his plan is to reclaim Jerusalem and to get to that temple, because that is the prize. That's the ultimate prize. So what happens once he gains that crown in 2022? You've had the Iran war already. They've already been destroyed. He sees this crowning, and then what do we see? That start of that Ezekiel 38-39 first Gog war. The first Gog war in Ezekiel 38-39 is not the same as Revelation 20. There's an easy way to make this demarcation. In Revelation 20, at the end, when Satan is loosed for a short period, the people that fall, the beings that fall, the spiritual beings, because they're 1,000-year millennial, they're not flesh anymore, these spiritual beings that fall, as Satan is being let loose, are consumed by God's hand by fire. They are never buried. And they never see the second death because they are judged right then and there. They never go to the book of life, and they never are judged in that book of life, and they're never forced into the lake of fire or accepted into heaven. So they never see that second death. That's what that means. But this first war, the seals war between seals 1 and 6, this Ezekiel 38-39 war, These 10 nations, God pummels them from heaven. He drops hailstones and induces plagues and global earthquakes, and it's the sixth seal event that I've talked about for so many years. Revelation 6, sixth seal, whole world feels this. This destruction of these 10 nations, these are buried in a grave, in a physical dirt grave in the ground for 7 months in a valley called Ham Gog. They build a city over it because there's so much commerce due to the amount of destruction and carnage that's happened in this region, and it takes them 7 months to cleanse the area. They go out and mark the little areas where the bones are so they can go out and send teams out and cleanse that area and get rid of those bones and bury them so that they can clean the land. This happens for 7 years, alluding to what? Tribulation, the 3.5 years, the 3.5 years after abomination, before and after. But like I've said for a while, that 1,335 days that we talk about over here is that shortened second half where those elect would not be left. So we want to realize that it's alluding to a 7-year peace treaty, but God says if he doesn't shorten that second half, that none of his elect will be left. So we're going to have to judge, or we're going to have to trust God's word that they're at extreme peril at that point, and he has to remove them, or there won't be anything left, and all that will be left is radical Islamic people and Antichrist on the ground. So I think there's a purpose for all that. So as we see this Ezekiel war happening, I wrote a number of things down here. I want you to understand the chronological events that are going to happen here. So you have the Ottoman Emperor crowned right after he destroys Iran and the Kurds. You have the rise of the Ottoman Empire due to the Shemitah year and the destruction of the Second Temple, the rise of the Babylonians, the rise of the Ottomans. He gets crowned. He is now the White Horseman, or the first seal for sure, because he is a crowned king. He is given a crown. You look at Revelation 6, when he hands out that crown. He's given a crown. It doesn't say he has a crown right at the beginning. He's given a crown. He is compelled forward in stature to the point he gains a crown, and the Muslims will follow him, and that's due to the destruction of Daniel 8 here, and the Irans and the Kurds. But if you go into Joel 1, 2, and 3, you find something really important. As Erdogan's driving towards Israel, we start to see a locust event start to decimate Israel. This is the first part of the Ezekiel 5:12 prophecy. A third of the Israelites and the Jews will die by plagues and locusts. A third will die by Gog and the sword as he gets to Israel with his 10 nations and gets to the Temple Mount. But then he's going to die because God's going to throw the sixth seal down on him. And guess what? The remnant flees. The third of the Jews escape and are hidden for the 1,260 days. Well, look at that. The 1,260 days are getting ready to come up right after this. But when God destroys him on the sixth seal, and you have these 7-month burial happening of Gog and his armies, God is starting to break that 7th seal and select his first line of defense, his 144,000 elect special warriors to go against this Antichrist over here. We start into the trumpets. And I'm going to continue to beat this one up. If you think this sixth seal event is an Armageddon thing down here, then you need to look at Revelation 8, 1 and 2, because it tells you the 7 seals are broken, and then, and only then, the 7 trumpets are handed out. You have to justify placing this 6th seal somewhere over here in either abomination or tribulation, great tribulation, anywhere else. It's a sorrows event. We haven't even had the signing of the covenant of death yet. There's no reason for us to be in tribulation at this point. This is a beginning sorrows event. Okay, and if you go into Ezekiel 39, he talks about how he took the prophets of old, his disciples, took them aside, as we see in Matthew, Luke, and all these other, Mark, and all these places where they're the beginning of the sorrows. This private meeting that he has with these 4 disciples, and he names them. You can go look them up. They're in Mark at the very beginning of the chapter. He tells them what's going to happen and why this 1260 is so important and all these events are going to happen. But this alludes back to Ezekiel 38:39 also. You go into this first part of 39, he talks about the prophecies of the old prophets and the disciples that he talked to before. You're linking this all back to, again, to the Daniel 8 and all these different prophecies that we've talked about so many times. So as he's starting to select these 144,000 during the 6th seal event, we hand out those 7 trumpets. He starts to blow those first 4. This is a devastating effect on the planet that wipes a third of the basic Earth away. A third of the planet is devastated by these 4 effects. The seas, the green grasses burn up, the seas are tossed, the islands are tossed, the ships in the seas, the fish all die. It's bad. Okay? And you just had a 6th seal war prior to this. So this is going to be a build-up event to the Antichrist. And by the time we get to Antichrist on the 6th trumpet, people are going to really be in a bad place, and they're going to want this reset of this new world order and take this pain away. So by the time we get the 6th trumpet, it's going to be ugly, and a lot of people are just going to cave. And this is why this message is so important, so they can see this roadmap and know that they can't go there and that there is hope. There's a good ending to the story, but it's going to get extremely ugly until the end. And they are going to be here because they're not taken away. Rapture is pre-wrath. Pre-wrath is here. After the Lord has come back on the 7th trumpet and we start that bull face. So you're going to be here till then. It's just that simple. And I've wrote articles about that. You can go out and look at them. Once these trumpets start to hit, those 10 nations are going to have a power struggle, and they're going to consolidate into 4 regions. These 4 regions are going to change into a diversified 4th kingdom as Antichrist rises. As Isaiah 14 tells us, he's going to rise on that 6th trumpet with the false prophet. He overthrows the 3 regions or other 3 kingdoms from this consolidation of the 10 of the destruction of Gog's armies here. He's going to reform that into a diversified kingdom. And this is that we're talking about that 8th kingdom beast that they talk about, the 7th head being wounded as if it was dead, but then it comes back as a supernatural being. This is Gog dying here, being destroyed, being resurrected as that pit opens on the 5th trumpet. Michael standing on the pit. He opens the pit. He pulls Satan out of heaven, throws him on the ground, but he does not touch that grave, as Isaiah 14 tells us. And he brings forth a dead Gog out of the grave, held by Hades, because he's in a holding tank, as he's dead here, because it tells us the worms are above and below him. As Isaiah 14 tells us, he's dead. But he's going to bring him forth. He's going to spring him forth, as Isaiah 14 tells us, into an Antichrist figure. Then he's going to, and these 3 nations are going to look at the supernatural thing, because it's going to be a televised thing. The world is going to see this resurrectional thing, because they built a whole city over this thing over 7 months. It's a very high commerce area right now. due to the amount of cleansing that's going on in the land. So there's going to be a lot of people around. There's going to be a lot of reporters. There's going to be a lot going on in that area. So it's going to be a televised event. Once this thing comes out of this ground, they're going to know he's not normal, and you got the false prophet throwing down fire from heaven. So we know he's not normal. He's going to change these into a diversified fourth kingdom called the Beast Kingdom. This is that new world order everybody's talking about. When's the new world order coming in? Right now. Right now. Between 23 and 24, we're going to see this change of this, and it's going to be a reset, because by all this corona, destruction, meltdown, trumpets hitting, and I say the 4 trumpets hit the communist areas to buffer that 10 region area that he wants to affect. And he doesn't want to affect the Christians and the Jews, so he's going to affect the communists and the people that haven't believed in him for over 6,000 years. So he's going to buffer that area, and I don't believe China or Russia is going to be a factor after that point either, because I believe they're just basically feeding money and arms to all these proxy wars and things anyway. They really don't want to be in this war other than to make money. So once we see this original fourth kingdom come up and we see an antichrist rise, he's going to overthrow, or the other 3 regions are just going to capitulate. Whatever happens there, how that happens, we're going to see that fourth kingdom rise, which is Antichrist's kingdom. Now Antichrist is on the ground. He's resurrected. He stops those continual burnt sacrifices 30 days prior to the signing of the covenant of death. Because you look at the 1290 verbiage, it's a span from the stopping of the continual burnt offerings. Some say daily sacrifices. I don't like the new interpretations. I go back to the Revised Standard Version 1952 Bible that I use, or King James, but even King James does not indicate this as the same event anymore. I think we need to go back to the old text. And in Daniel 8 and Daniel 12, we talk about the stopping of the continual burnt offerings. Okay, and this is why this is so important in the 2300 and all these other 4 sets of days that he gives us, or at least the 3 sets of days with the additional 1260 as abomination between the signing and the abomination. So he's going to stop those continual burnt sacrifices 30 days prior to the signing. So that's a marker. So if we know that he comes out and says, listen, you can't do continual burnt offerings anymore, 30 days after he makes that proclamation, we see a signing of the covenant of the 7-year treaty of death with the nations. So you know it's coming. You should see it coming if that's the case, if I'm interpreting this right. Then, once he signs that covenant, we start into tribulation of the 1260 days. Okay? And a lot of people want to take this 1290 and throw it into the future, but that's not the way this works. You look at the way that's stated. He stops those continual burnt sacrifices and then commits abomination at the end. It's a span of time. We know that the 1260 days is the signing of the covenant of death, or the treaty, to abomination. So everyone should know that one. That's the 42 months, the 3.5 years. But then the 1335 days, as I've been talking for a while, is a shortened second half. Why? Because he tells us, once the 2 witnesses come out at the very beginning, once that covenant of death happens, we see those 2 witnesses appear on the Temple Mount, or wherever they're going to be, and they start to proclaim for 1260 days testimony of the truth of God, and no one can touch them or they're devoured. They have the ability to shut the skies up, to not allow it to rain for 3.5 years. They have the ability to throw down the 10 plagues of Egypt upon the planet at any time that they're choosing. This is their ability. Anyone that attacks them is devoured by fire out of their mouth. No one can touch them until Abomination occurs. Once abomination occurs, Antichrist has gained enough power and authority that he overthrows these two witnesses, and what? They die, lie in the street for 3.5 days, and God tells us, when this occurs, do not look back. Don't grab anything. You head to the mountains because the story is about over. We are done with this one, and we are going to judge people, and we are going to pour the bowls down on the wicked soon. So you need to get away, get out of this place, because I'm going to start dropping bowls down on this place, but I'm going to rapture you right prior to that. And look how that Shemitah end happens there. Isn't that crazy? So you got the start of the Shemitah back here in September of 2021. Well, 6 years later, we have the end of the 6-year cycle to the beginning of the millennial cycle. Our Lord comes back. We are with the Lord. The Feast of Tabernacles happens. This hour of God, and I've gone through those calculations. If you want to go look at them, that's fine. I'm not going to go through them again. Is the 1 hour equates down to 15 days in our time. 1 hour of God in 1,000 years equates down to 15 days. If you look at the outer boundaries of the Feast of Trumpets of October 2nd and 3rd of 2027 to the outer boundaries of the Feast of Tabernacles on October 16th and 17th of 2027, that falls in that 15-day window. And at that point, this is when we start to see Jerusalem come back down as the bride of heaven, reconstitute with earth, joined, and then we start into that Revelation 20:21 of seeing the bride. Okay, so this is sort of how this works. I wanted to go through this so you could see all of these correlations, how the signing of this 100-year treaty, this destruction of this Ottoman Empire 100 years ago is going to come back with a vengeance as Erdogan marches through the Middle East, forms his 10 nations, to today, to the end of 2023, 2024, where he's destroyed, and then we see this potential Antichrist resurrectional event of Isaiah 14 that I talked about in here. We've got a lot of things coming up. I fear that the 4th of July is going to be a problem, because what happened during Memorial Day weekend? They unlocked it, and now look at us. We have hotspot. Texas is a mess. Florida is a mess. What do you think is going to happen on the 4th of July? No one is paying attention to these protocols. And so when they unleash the 4th of July and everybody goes out, by the time we hit this fall, the second wave is going to be devastating, I believe. And you look at any prior pandemics, and I'm a pathologist, I'm a tree pathologist by trade, I'm a forester, a village forester, so I know pathology, and I spent 10 years learning pathology of animals and trees and how diseases and things affect them, that the second waves are always 10 to 20 times worse than the original waves, and this is not a second wave event yet. This will not happen until fall. We are still locking down the first wave and still unleashing part of the first wave out here. And as we can see, within a few weeks after we unlock Memorial Day weekend, we're having some major issues again. So I believe that this is going to just, excuse me, keep dominoing down and causing major problems. And by the time we get into the next year and a half, and we start this Daniel 8 effect of this Daniel 8 war with Turkey, Iran, and the Kurds. And like I say, you know, we just saw within the last few days the Kurds being invaded into their territories by Turkey. And Turkey's trying to genocide these people, and they're going to be driven into Iraq before they're done. But this would be the next real cog that we can look at, is this Daniel 8 war. If this happens, then we have to start to think that what we're seeing in front of us on this chart is really happening. And I don't know that for sure until these events occur. I'm waiting like you all are. We're all waiting for Daniel 8 right now. And it's amazing. The biblical community seems to be following itself. A month or so ago, we were talking about Daniel 8. Now what are we talking about? Daniel 11. Why? Because you just saw an article, if you've been watching the news at all, about how Turkey and Egypt potentially could go to war in where? Libya. What's Libya got to do with anything? Ezekiel 38:39. They're part of the 10 regions of Africa. There's 3 of them. Is it lining up? We'll see. It's going to happen before long. Next year and a half is going to change everything. And as we start to drive into this next year and a half, as we start to see this starting of this 2300-day Daniel effect, you need to start preparing yourselves, your families, getting yourself right with the Lord. You got to realize you got to repent. You got to get on your knees. You got to grovel a little, take the ego out of this equation, and realize there's only one door, and that's through the Lord Jesus. God bless everybody.